one of my favorite quotes from Drucker and then researching where it was from and then realizing he didn't say it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it keeps us honest, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I had to put the record straight that what he actually said is culture, no matter how defined, is singularly persistent, which is another way of saying is your culture is stubborn. It's a buzzsaw. If your strategy doesn't take it into account, it'll be cut to shreds.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive impact by focusing on customer experience and culture together. I'm excited to have James Killian on the podcast. He's a friend that I really enjoyed interacting with and teaming on some stuff. James is the founder of the Customer Driven Leader, and he's also one of the founding faculty members for the first master's program in CX at MSU. Welcome to the podcast, James.
A real privilege to be here. Thanks for having me on, Matt.
Always fun to chat. We're going to have a lot of fun today.
Always.
You also founded your own podcast and recently had Lou Carbone, who's been a great guest and friend of mine, friend of both of ours. He's actually on the faculty at MSU with you. And so you launched a podcast about the customer-driven leader. Congrats on that.
Thank you. We all needed another podcast, Matt, so it was my turn in the queue.
Well, I look forward to celebrating your 60-plus episode as well.
Well, we'll have you on to make sure that happens. Thanks.
That'll be fun. Tell us, let's just get started. Why customer-driven leader?
Yeah. So, my whole career has been an intersection of a few different acts, right? We all kind of have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And Act 1 for me was really about leadership assessment, succession planning, team development. And that never changed really, but it was much more of a focus earlier in my career, which is what I did my PhD on in industrial and organizational psychology. I studied under Dr. Robert Hogan of Hogan Assessment Systems, pretty famous guy. And I thought that's what I was going to do for my whole career. And then over the course of time, my interest shifted into the employee experience. And so as part of the employee experience, then understanding the importance, really the criticality that the role that the leader plays in creating really great employee experiences became really interesting to me. And then just really over the course of time, by accident, I guess, for want of a better word, found myself at Qualtrics for a little over 5 years. And obviously, they're a big customer experience name out there and employee experience leader. And that intersection of the leader, the employee, and the customer experience just became really, really interesting and really, really important to me. Just to elaborate on that, so I'll go back to the service profit chain, right? Heskett and Schlesinger and those guys. And we've all been a recipient of this, even if you don't know what the heck the service profit chain is, right? We have all been in a situation where we had an affinity for a brand, maybe, and an employee interacted with us, an employee who should be an extension of that brand, and we had an interaction with that employee, and maybe it wasn't so good. And because of that interaction, it tainted our love or affinity for that brand because the employee was an extension of it. And if you look at today's world, where I think the stat is something like 86% of people would switch brands just because of a bad experience, right? That one interaction becomes really, really important. Now, so in summary, the service profit chain is every organization has a brand. That brand is delivered through products and or services. And in a B2C environment, those products and services are delivered by employees to customers. So that customer experience then comes back around and has an impact on again, that affinity for the brand and customer lifetime value and all the things that, as practitioners of customer experience, we're really interested in. We've all been there, right? We've all felt that. And we've also been in the same scenario where maybe we weren't having a great experience with a brand, but because a really exceptional ambassador of that brand, an employee, intervened, and they may have turned around our perception of that brand just because of that. Now, I say all that because nowhere in the service profit chain was the importance of the leadership ever stressed. And that's why it's so important to me. And what I'm talking about isn't necessarily new, but I think it needs new focus, new attention. It needs a spotlight on it because, again, that leader creates the environment that enables and empowers those employees to take that extra step, to go that extra distance, to do that one other thing that makes you stand out in a crowd in a very hyper competitive market.
It's music to my ears, the focus on leadership experience that you have, and which is why I think we become friends. Because we share this interest, right? And it's really great to have you on the podcast now. Um, but I'd love to, encourage the audience to like and subscribe, and I'll give a shout out to a couple recent episodes that are also about leadership experience, which is a topic that others have talked about as well. One is Bernie Jaworski, and you never would have guessed this connection. He's a professor at Claremont in the Drucker School, the Drucker Chair, and he wrote a book with one of his PhD students about how Confucianism and Drucker go together, and it's all about leadership and about how the leaders set the tone for the culture and help realize the mission and the importance of leadership to both Drucker and Confucius in different ways. So that was really fun. I did a review of his book and had him on the podcast. Another one is actually Joseph Michelli, who's written a number of best-selling books about companies like Starbucks and Mercedes and Zappos and others. We talked a lot about employee experience and leadership and culture. So those are a couple of things that you could check out. But I've got one of the world's best experts on leadership experience here now. So we're going to dive even deeper on that today.
Well, and just to insert something there, Matt. Uh, it's an honor to be included among all these people who have already written all these books. I'm actually almost done with mine, which I've called Obsessed: Cultivating the Customer-Driven Leader. So that'll be available in the new year. So wrapping up the editorials now. And I am a fan of your show, and I have watched. And one of the episodes that you're referring to, I believe that's the one where I actually learned that Drucker didn't actually say culture eats strategy for breakfast. That is a misnomer that's been attributed to him. It's still a great quote for sure, but important to note that, I think.
Yeah, I opened my own book. By the way, I'm looking forward to your book, and I'll definitely do a review and love to have you back on to talk about that after it comes out. In my own book, The CX and Culture Connection, I opened the book with one of my favorite quotes from Drucker, and then researching where it was from, and then realizing he didn't say it.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it keeps us honest, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I had to put the record straight that what he actually said is culture, no matter how defined, is singularly persistent, which is another way of saying is your culture is stubborn. It's a buzzsaw. If your strategy doesn't take it into account, it'll be cut to shreds.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Right. Um, and your leaders can help evolve your culture, but it's very hard to evolve, but it's doable. Better get it right the first time.
Well, I would say to that point too, you can't evolve the culture without having the right leaders in place. That's for sure.
Absolutely. I know I've shared this with you. I'll mention it for the audience as a kickoff to the next question is I wrote an article a number of years ago with Sujay Saha, who was also on the podcast recently. He was a mentee at PwC and then went on to launch Cortico X. Our article was called Return on Experience Cubed, ROX Cubed, how leadership, customer, and employee experience go together to drive value. Okay. You can see the article on the screen. It's on from Strategy and Business. It was a cover feature. And then I recently did a Substack on this about AI leadership and culture. And the basic premise is like this, James. It's a virtuous cycle. Your leaders influence your culture and your employee experience, which influences your customer experience, which feeds back into leadership experience. So the leadership is like, or another way, if you wanted to make an equation, LX times CX plus EX equals value. So LX is a multiplier.
100%. And the way that we see that, so I use a series of behavioral diagnostics, psychometric assessments, interviews, stakeholder feedback to triangulate between the leader, the follower, and the situation, right? Which aligns with what you're talking about here. But ultimately, what it comes down to is finding insights that help leaders really find simple, repeatable habits, basically. Little things like how you open meetings, how you make trade offs, how you celebrate wins, how you deal with losses, so that those leaders are actually building, in this case, customer empathy into more daily decisions, habits, and actions. Rather than just having inspirational posters on the walls in the halls.
Yeah, and in your body of work, you've got this diagnostic toolkit with the four quadrants of the different types of leaders. Do you want to share more about the different types of leaders, how your diagnostic helps you figure out which one of them you are, and then what do you do with that insight?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about that. So the research, the model that Matt's referring to, came out of a study that was really organic in nature, out of the previously mentioned Michigan State University. So important to note that the Masters in Customer Experience Management program that I teach in, and that Lou Carbone teaches in, who you referenced as well, this isn't entry level grad students, right? They didn't just complete a bachelor's degree and decide, I don't know what I want to do, so I'm going to go get a master's degree. These are seasoned senior team leaders, many of them executives in brands like Apple, EY, Delta Airlines, AT&T, Wolverine Boots, GM Whirlpool. I mean, basically every vertical that you could imagine, and some really, really smart, strategic people. And so the model that you're talking about, that I call the customer driven leader, I'm very consistent there. That's the name of the podcast. It's the name of the book. It's the name of the model, because it's all about the customer driven leader and the nature of that. So essentially, through conversations with these students and surveys and focus groups and meeting with over 70 business leaders over the course of several years, it wasn't the intention to create a model, Matt. It was really just trying to learn more about, the journey. Where'd you come from? Where are you now? Where do you want to go? How do you maintain market relevance in this super hyper competitive market, which, by the way, I think we're headed for massive market consolidation over the next couple of years. I'll say more about that here in a little bit. But essentially, through all these conversations and focus groups, a theme started to present itself. And to your point, there were four primary customer leader types, and very unique behaviors within each of those types, and very unique and defining adjectives or characteristics of those leaders, teams, and cultures. And I'll say that because I think they're all an extension, right? Leaders create teams, teams create cultures, right? And so, basically, if you can think about a pyramid or a ladder moving from least desirable to most desirable, starting at the bottom rung would be customer avoidant. Now, you may say, so to summarize, customer avoidant, customer tolerant, customer centric, and then customer driven. So I'll take those one at a time here. So if you think about customer avoidant, and maybe you say, James, why are you, calling out a leader type as customer avoidant? That's so insulting, right? But that's the theme that presented itself through the descriptions that all these leaders gave us. And a good example of a customer avoidant leader, I use the example of Dean Kamen, who I'm sure is a really great guy, but he's the creator of the Segway, right? And this was supposed to be the transportation invention that was going to revolutionize, but
He also invented dialysis, so he has had other
he did. I mean, yes, he's a brilliant guy.
he's had other really successful innovators. This one, it was more about, like you're saying, there are reasons it didn't take off, and it's not because the idea is not good.
Absolutely 100%. And a really great synopsis of why is because there was so much paranoia about the secret getting out that all of the development was done on that product behind closed doors with literally with shades drawn so that actually there was some competition from Japan. They didn't want the secret to get out. But by the product of that also was they never bothered to ask anybody, would you spend $5,000 to ride this funny looking thing through your neighborhood and kind of look dorky while you're doing it? And the answer to that was no. So now the only place you see it is in tours, right? Or in Paul Blart Mall Cop. And so, it's an example of customer avoidance, what I would call being oblivious as well, and that is not intended to sound really necessarily mean spirited, but you can also have malicious customer avoidance. And an example that I give there is Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos. So she definitely didn't want any customer feedback because she knew what she was going to get. They were going to tell her this isn't working, and that wasn't good enough for her, right? So that's customer avoidant. If you then move to customer tolerant, I often talk about Elon Musk as a really great example there. So he recognizes the importance of customers. Customers pay the bills. We're definitely going to give the customers things that they're asking for, but we're going to give it to them on our timeline. I mean, we're not going to necessarily go out of our way to deliver on behalf of the customer because the customer is a means to an end. So in other words, they fund my next endeavor. And so that's where he gets his cash flow from to fund whatever project he's on to next, right? So that's customer tolerant. Both of those, by the way, I would consider to be what I'll call customer derailing. So then as we move to the top two, which I'll call customer aligning, there's customer-centric leaders, teams, and cultures. And here's where things get really interesting to me, Matt, is that we talk about customer centricity as being this panacea, right? Or even if you think about specific research on leaders or leadership, or you may have participated in a leadership 360 where you rate yourself and then other people maybe rate your characteristics and how, your prowess on certain competencies. They often have one question there about customer centricity. So we've put customer centricity up to be on this pedestal, and it is good. It's definitely better than being customer derailing, customer avoidant, or customer tolerant. But it also in part of these conversations, what also came out was it also tends to be more of a lagging indicator. And so it's more like we're trying to drive the car forward while looking in the rearview mirror at net promoter scores or CSAT or what have you. And the byproduct too is that customer centric leaders, teams, and cultures are almost over rotating on their desire to please the customer to the point where they will actually default to customizability before scalability because they always say yes to the customer. And there's this tendency to overcommit and then not be able to deliver. And that's a big problem that I've seen with a lot of these customer-centric leaders.
I don't know if you've come across them, but there's a interesting, specialty customer feedback tool called Customer. I think it's like Client Savvy, which is bought by Clearly Rated, and it's for professional services. And the reason I bring it up is their score doesn't make 10 the highest. It actually makes, like, you want to be balanced, and if you over rotate on and you get an 8 or a 9, it means you're too customized to the customer.
That's fascinating. I'm not familiar with it.
It's targeted for, like, accounting firms, law firms, construction firms, B2B professional services organizations that can become job shops with enormous customization.
Fascinating. I'm not familiar with it, but thanks for that education. I'm definitely going to look into that. I think that's spot on.
It's more of a boutique, not nearly as big as Qualtrics, but it's a pretty innovative play on the metric for the reason you just described, which is if you're really customer centric, it can actually overshoot and you over deliver beyond expectations.
That's right. That's right. And so then the final leader type here is that customer driven leader, which checks the boxes on customer centric leaders, teams, and cultures, right? Insofar as they need to meet the demands of the customer today, and they definitely do that. But here's where things get interesting. Customer driven leaders, teams, and cultures are really they're really obsessed about getting their arms around as much data and insight and talking to as many customers as frequently as possible so that they can innovate on behalf of the customer. So they're not just interested in being relevant today. They're thinking, how do we maintain market relevance 12, 24, 36 months from now?
More of a sensing organization.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. That's exactly right. Because, I mentioned this massive market consolidation that I think is going to happen, right? You start seeing it right now. You mentioned Qualtrics before. His announcement, Qualtrics just acquired Press Ganey. And Press Ganey had long been criticized about not innovating, right? So they definitely were delivering some value, maybe in a customer-centric kind of a way, but they weren't in a customer-driven kind of a way because their innovation wasn't doing something that I think is really, really important that customer-driven leaders do. They weren't politely challenging the customer. What do I mean by that? Politely challenging the customer is innovating on behalf of the customer about things that they didn't even know that they should care about until they care about them. And a really great example of that, I was reminded of this story a couple of weeks ago. It was back in 2004. I was visiting a friend of mine in Houston, and he pulls up this magazine. He's like, "Hey, James, check it out. This is the iPhone. It doesn't have any buttons. I'm going to get it as soon as it comes out." And I looked at him and I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Who would have a phone without any buttons? Well, guess what I've got right here, Matt. you know, so that's a great example of politely challenging the customer. Would I ever go back to a BlackBerry or God forbid, a Motorola StarTAC flip phone with punch buttons? Absolutely not, right? So that's a great example of innovating on behalf of the customer and politely challenging them. So, you and I have talked a lot about, having a system of accountability for leaders, and that's largely what I'm trying to do here, right? Is if your default mechanism as an individual leader or as a leadership team or even as a culture, if your default mechanism is to be customer avoidant, particularly when under stress and pressure, how can we get you to be at least customer tolerant, right? If you're customer tolerant, how can we get you to be at least customer centric? And then if we can get you to customer driven, how do you stay there and then maintain that market relevance for the long haul? Because playing the long game, really important right now. And here's the issue that I'm seeing too. And I'm sure you can appreciate this, there are a lot of stories out there right now, both in the press and that I'm seeing firsthand, where leaders are succumbing to the pressure put on them by boards, shareholders, or even their own C-suite, and they're engaging in behaviors in front of customers that may win the battle but lose the war. So they'll get the numbers for the quarter, but they do it in a way that erodes brand trust and loyalty, and that is not sustainable for the long haul. So those organizations who are behaving that way, they're going to be the ones that get gobbled up. They're going to be the ones who get acquired, not the ones who acquire.
So what we were talking about before, leadership has a huge impact. The way leaders show up and drive the adoption of AI, the way you apply it into your business, the way businesses deal with some of the emerging, opportunities and challenges, that will drive how innovative they are. That'll drive their success, and which is a great segue into a quick minute reel we're going to run for my mastermind groups, which is a chance for leaders not only to go on their learning journey themselves, but with other leaders to be on that learning journey with other leaders. So let's listen to the minute about the mastermind groups, and we'll connect in more on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment, and with Greg Kihlstrom, host of the Agile Brand podcast, on a group focused on building a self-funding growth flywheel. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. James, I've really been enjoying our conversation about leadership and thanks for sharing the customer-driven leader framework. And I'd encourage people again, check out the QR code on the screen. You can actually take just a few minute quick diagnostic tool, see what type of leader you are, and then set up a Zoom with James and me, and we can talk more about how you can take that forward. And we're excited to collaborate on some of the things you can do to realize a stronger leadership experience at your company for yourself and your other leaders at your company. I guess my next question is, you just alluded to it a moment ago, is, how does leadership experience reinforce the connection between CX and brand?
Yeah, a great question, and I think we've kind of threaded the needle a bit on that, right? But essentially, your brand is your promise to your customers, and the employee experience is really how you keep it. And so when leaders model clarity, empathy, follow through, employees can replicate that externally. And that creates what I call the symmetry of experiences, right? So if leaders are inconsistent or self-protective, that dissonance shows up in the customer journey. So leadership experience really becomes the glue between CX and brand, because it helps with shaping the stories that employees can tell and what emotions customers remember, really. And that emotional bond between the customer and the brand is so very, very important. And that's, as you're aware, a lot of the work that Lou Carbone does with experience engineering, and that is ultimately the impact that the service profit chain has on that customer experience. Are you creating a positive emotional bond between your brand and the customer? And in the absence of really great leadership who's invested in that, it's not going to happen.
One of the things I learned from Lou is, the importance of unconscious thought and how we engage in those emotions, and how you can be very intentional about the metaphors that define your brand and the emotional motif that's around it. People, if you want to go more into this, you can check out Lou's book, Clued In. I have a review on the JourneySpark website, or check out our earlier, I think it was like episode 5 on the podcast. Use episode 1 for you. Yeah, and Lou and I have launched recently we're in the process of launching the XM Collaboratory. That we had the announcement on that. You can go to xmcollaboratory.org, the focus of which is bringing academics and business together to advance research on the importance of emotion and how it drives value. So, what I love to think, James, is that like you just said, emotion drives memory. And the peaks in the customer journey, the spark of energy along the customer journey, hence JourneySpark, right? The JourneySpark has many layers to that metaphor, because there's a leader's journey, an employee journey, and a customer journey.
100%. I love the spark analogy, by the way. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, so you're sparking energy and not just ideas, and culture's about energy. And the emotions that are the peaks of the customer journey are delivered largely through employee behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So it could either be a digital experience or physical environment, or it can be a human-to-human interaction, which are overwhelmingly still very important around delivering on your full brand promise. So there are very few organizations that can deliver their brand promise purely through a digital experience. And so the employee experiences are critical. There's also the indirect effect of your employees collaborate on creating your digital experiences. So even if you have a purely digital experience, you still want to be agile, want to drive collaboration, want to drive experimentation, want to drive empowerment. So your culture impacts your success there. And like you talked earlier about understanding behaviors for leaders, I'd like to spend a little more time there. And, that because I think you nailed it, that behavior is critical. That is the CX and culture connection. And like, how do you actually identify and nurture and drive habits around the right behaviors? I think the most critical question for people focused on CX and culture together.
Yeah, to me, there's a big component of accountability there, Matt. And we know this, right? We know that leaders have to be accountable for their teams and delivery of the brand promises. But everybody gets busy and they sometimes forget about the things that they need to be doing and how they need to represent. And I think, having a system of accountability or an architecture that really operationalizes good intent is just absolutely critical because that's how you translate strategy into observable commitments and habits. And so that means defining experience promises, signing owners, like who actually does this thing, whether it's people, systems, technology, process, workflow, digital experience, right? Um, Having those owners then measure progress and creating storytelling loops that really keep those promises alive. So in my experience, change really fails when accountability depends on memory or motivation or enthusiasm, and it succeeds when it's actually embedded in things like, again, habits or metrics or rituals and peer expectations, which I think you and I would naturally define as part of culture, and that's just hugely important.
No, what you and I have talked about, just recently, that I'll introduce for the audience and ask you to build on it is, I would recommend a three-part approach as a leader to how to drive a more alignment and energy within your company. If you're either a C-level leader that's a champion for this, or a leader who's trying to influence peers and up, here's a three-step recipe to success. Step one, you want to build alignment around where are you today in your culture, and the type of, are you customer driven, are you customer centric, how is your culture supporting or hindering your strategic goals for CX and your mission and vision, and how CX supports that. So that's more strategic alignment and getting leaders themselves aligned about the journey you're going to go on and what's the roadmap for that journey. What are you trying to do? That's kind of getting aligned as leaders around where you're going, and building that energy and momentum among your leadership team. The second step is enrolling additional leaders into the journey and starting to have conversations with each other and but more importantly too, with employees. And you're actually starting to build a movement in your culture now where the leaders are expanding their energy out into the company with additional leaders. And then the third stage is about systematizing habit building and customer listening. So you create this continuous feedback loop to drive habit building and fine tuning on the journey. But if you don't do the first two stages before you kind of implement habit building and listening, it's just going to be whack-a-mole and break fix.
100% agreed with that. That's a big mic drop moment right there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is what I'm so excited to team on, is how to leverage your experience in in organizational psychology, and like understanding how to, your whole body of work around how do you define what type of leader you are, and how do you assess, because you can't improve if you don't know where you are. So how do you assess what type of leader you are and what type of leader you want to be, and what are the behaviors of different types of leaders? To combine that with the culture diagnostic tools that I've got around, and together we can help engage and build a program for change around leadership experience.
100%, Matt. And I think this is so very critical. And viewers, listeners, if you take nothing else from this session, right? I mean, here's some really scary statistics right now. So Microsoft has estimated that 77% of all US employees have just been waiting for the right opportunity to leave their current employer. And 27% of those would do it without even having another job. That's a pretty mind boggling statistic. And by the way, that is not mutually exclusive of your leaders. So let's even be more conservative. Let's just say 25 to 50%, right? What would happen to your organization if a quarter to a half of your leaders and their institutional knowledge walked out the door in the next 6 to 12 months? That is catastrophic, right? And then you think about the fact, and we've all seen this pattern before as well. So, what happens when those leaders leave? Well, the longest tenured individual contributor or the highest performing individual contributor by default will get put into that leadership role. And that person will have been woefully unprepared to take on such a responsibility. And so it really becomes important as part of the culture work that you and I are talking about, I think, to identify the next generation of leaders and to properly prepare them to take on those roles and those responsibilities and to sustain, both create and sustain those habits that we're talking about for accountability and delivering the brand promises as an extension through their teams.
A number of years ago, um, I got really interested in like how do you encourage innovation? How do you encourage the right culture? And I helped companies set up like digital innovation funds and ways to crowdsource ideas and how do you nurture the right governance and the right culture around that. And then I was spending some time with someone who's very involved in thought leadership at PwC, John Sfiokla, and he wrote this really cool book called like The Billionaires. I think it was something about billionaires. It was some research he did about like billionaires who were successful largely from founding companies and kind of monetizing that. And what was really interesting about this is that almost all of these billionaires started at bigger companies and left because they were pissed off about not being supported. Think of like Bloomberg. He was in the IT department of a bank and he launched Bloomberg. And almost all these billionaires left because their companies would not support their vision. So this is a play on what you're saying. That got me really thinking about what creates a good leadership environment and what does this have on the customer and employee experience. If you don't have the right leaders at all, they're going to go elsewhere and innovate and create something else.
100%. And, Tamar Cohen as well. And she and I are working on what I think is a really important piece of research right now. We're shopping around the article for publication right now, but a sneak peek into that, which I think is going to present new challenges for leaders, is the shift from more traditional measures of employee experience towards what we're calling work experience and empowering leaders to actually manage that. Because here's what's really interesting about it, right? So we've got a few newer trends that are impacting how we get work done, and certainly it's going to impact culture work that you and I do as well, Matt. One of which is the generational impact, and we've known about this for a really long time, right? We're seeing 81 and 18-year-olds working side by side, so that part isn't new, but there's some compounding effects going on there. One of which being obviously the impacts of AI, and AI is great, right? I mean, I use it on a daily basis. I'm sure you do as well, and I'm a big fan of it. But this is the first time in history that we've actually seen senior leaders, CEOs of organizations, actually bragging about the fact that they've reduced their overhead by laying people off because of the efficiencies created by AI. And then at the same time, we're seeing, oops, we shouldn't have really done that. We really got to rehire 25% of those people almost immediately, right? But here's the other thing that's further compounding what leaders are going to have to deal with is Upwork is predicting that by next year, 50.9% of US workers will be fractional contract or gig workers. So if you're a leader of a team and a quarter to a half or more of your team isn't actually an employee, how do you manage that culture, right? So this is going to be a real challenge, I think. And so getting ahead of that and preparing leaders with the right tools and the right empowerment to actually lead those kinds of hybrid teams, mixed teams, is going to be really, really important for the future of organizations.
100% agree. Um, as we wrap up, I'd like to suggest for the audience three things they could do. One is again, use the QR code on the screen and go to take the diagnostic, and then set up a conversation. And we're happy to listen and learn about what you're doing and share our perspectives, and perhaps we'll find an opportunity to collaborate and help you impact your journey that you're on with your organization. Um, Second thing is, be intentional about your leadership experience. Do you have a offsite that you're going to plan with your leaders? Do you have a sales retreat? Do you have a customer event you're doing? Is there an onboarding event and training for your leaders? We can help you shape those experiences to make them even more impactful. So that's a bite-sized way to get going on something. And the third would be if you're really ambitious and you're really focusing on more of a transformational journey that I mentioned with the engaging the leaders, starting the conversations and then behaviors and listening, we'd be happy to help you on that. But it could all start with just taking James's diagnostic tool and setting up a call.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And I think too, like a lot of these leadership offsites become event theater, right? Like, oh, we're going to go and, as my UK colleagues would say, have a development jolly. And we get together in the woods and we talk about great things, and then nothing ever happens after that. And so, the third thing that you mentioned about transformation, I think today the pace of change has accelerated so much that you say the word transformation, and I can see the knee jerk reaction in the audience, like, oh, transformation initiative. So, what we're talking about isn't a major change initiative necessarily, but small moves that can create big impacts, right? And that's those daily habits and those changes that you can manage at a micro level that have macro impact. So we're not talking about a huge change management initiative necessarily.
James, if people want to get in touch with you, is the easiest way to connect with you on LinkedIn, or should they go to your website? What should people do?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. You can go to my website, the customer driven leader.com, or just type in James Killian customer driven leader in Google, and I'll pop up in the first 10 hits.
Fantastic. It's been a lot of fun chatting on the podcast, and
Definitely.
I'm super excited about the collaboration and looking forward to having some of the Zoom meetings with folks who take your diagnostic.
100%. I'm looking forward to it as well. And I'm looking forward to having you on the Customer Driven Leader podcast in the new year. So
Look,
thanks for that.
absolutely looking forward to it. You sparked some great ideas for me, and I know you have for the audience. Thanks again for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Matt.